Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is another episode of Liam's First Look. My name is Liam, and I pick fights each and every week on this channel. And it wouldn't be my show if we didn't have some internet issues to get us started. But I believe that we should be rocking and rolling today. I'm excited about the card. I'm excited to break it down with all of you guys. We got the sharpest chat in the game, ready to rock and roll. And I must say, UFC Nashville, low-key a pretty decent card. Fun fighters, action fights stacked throughout. So, normally I give you guys the truth, right? I'll tell you off the rip if it's a bad card, but we got to dig through it anyway. I'm actually pretty excited to dig through the fights this week. So let's go. Let's get it in. And, let's deal with these fights right off the rip. And honestly, guys, when I say tech issues, it's not internet so much as it is, just all the technical things that go into producing a show like this. I'm not a tech guy. I'm a fight guy. So let's talk some fights. I was doing some jiu-jitsu earlier, feeling good. Got some, announcements that I'm going to be dropping about that later in the week. So stay tuned. Drop a like if you're excited about that. But in any case, guys, let's talk about this main event first and foremost, because, it's a short notice fight, right? 140 pounds. But I got to say, Rob Font is an interesting character. You know, I have more notes on Rob Font than any other fighter on this card, which I definitely have to rectify on the Cory Sandhagen side. He's an elite fighter. I definitely need to get more notes, more, due diligence on this guy because he's been fighting at a very high level now for a long time. But I have the Aljamain Sterling fight obviously taped out because Aljo's been one of my most profitable fighters to bet on. And Furio says Sandhagen Suarez parlay for the limit. That I think is going to be a lot of the sentiment this week, and it's kind of hard to resist. But I also think we got to give the other sides their due, and especially when we're talking about these big numbers, because these are definitely going to be some big implied win probabilities. Let's pull up our trusty Action Network calculator, and I bring this up every day just to keep myself sharp on these numbers. But let's look at the odds right now. Minus 270 for Cory Sandhagen. That's looking at about a 72, about a 73% win percentage for Cory Sandhagen. And you're looking at about a plus 230 comeback on Rob Font. That's about a 30% implied win probability. And Rob Font is 3-2 in his last 5 fights in the division. Same can be said for Cory Sandhagen. Rob Font's going to have the 1.5-inch reach advantage in this fight, but he is 5 years older. And what's interesting here is Rob Font, I felt like he was going to be putting in, a really hard training camp for the Boston card, and he ended up getting moved to this fight card on short notice. It's going to be at 140 pounds. And I feel like Rob Font is like a very big guy for 135. I felt like the weight cuts are hard for him. And when you see there's a lot of fights where he's outlanding his opponents. He's getting to them with that jab that he's constantly firing, that the New England Cartel, his gym, is known for, firing off at that jab, getting in somebody's face, really making it contentious, in boxing range. And, I think his durability's let him down many times, right? We've seen a number of times where he was dropped. Cheeto Vera, I bet Cheeto big in that fight, but there was a bunch of times, Andrew says he missed weight for the Cheeto Vera fight. Doesn't surprise me at all, and I had Cheeto Vera there at plus 115, ended up looking like a good bet. But in all cases, I feel like Rob Font is a pretty tough out for most guys in the UFC. He's not really an easy guy to get over on unless you finish him quick. There's been a handful of guys that did that. I think Pedro Munoz was able to accomplish that feat. I'm trying to think who else finished Rob Font quickly in the UFC. That's it. Yeah, so the only guy to accomplish that quick finish was Pedro Munoz, and by the way, he's got an excellent guillotine. He went to the body, which is where I think Rob Font can be susceptible at times, and he was mixing it up there. Rob started to panic. He went for a shot, got into a guillotine that he could not escape, and he ended up getting finished. But other than that, he's fought really tough. Looked like he was going to get finished by Jose Aldo. Looked like he was going to get finished by Cheeto Vera. Didn't end up getting finished in either of those fights. Fought really hard to the bell. And, he's a guy that's taken a lot of damage, but he's also a guy who's really tough, and he'll fight for your money at that plus money distinction. My guy, Prodigy MMA, friend of the show, did point out on Twitter, And I noticed it myself on Tapology that 95% of the votes are on Sandhagen this week, 5% on Font. So people aren't really giving him much of a chance here. And it does seem like Cory Sandhagen has been, on that next level, looking like he's ready to fight at the title level. But I think against a guy who's physical like Rob Font, maybe that could present some challenges. So my lean is definitely Sandhagen here. I do think my guy Cheeky Elbow, he says Sandhagen sub plus 600 for me. I think Sandhagen is an interesting grappling threat here. I did publish my gut level leans earlier today on Patreon, just because I have to go through and do my due diligence throughout the week. But a lot of people had been asking like, what are your leans? And I obviously come here and kind of talk about that during the first look. If you guys are unfamiliar, if this is your first time watching, welcome. Appreciate you guys checking it out. But just want to let you know, I sometimes change my mind over the course of the week. I do talk about my bets and my thoughts later in the week on Bets and Banter as well on the Thursday show. So that's just something to keep in mind. I also do an article for Rotogrinders every week, full card preview, called Kevin Holland by Darce choke in round 1 last week, for example. But I also called a bunch of other things wrong. So I'll be right and wrong each and every week, but always going to be accountable to whatever I come up with. And I always try my very best to come up with the sharpest angles that I can. But for me, my gut level lean here was Cory Sandhagen. I do feel like the price is a little bit wide. My thoughts here that I said earlier, Font was supposed to fight in Boston, like I mentioned. Good fighter, seems more like a gatekeeper in the division. I do think that's true. But last time out, he absolutely closed the gate on Adrian Yanez, first round knockout. That totally took me by surprise as well. I felt like Adrian Yanez was a guy on the come up, guy who could challenge him potentially in the boxing. And instead, Rob Font showed tremendous power there, finished Adrian Yanez brutally. And Cheeky Elbow says he took the Umar fight knowing it's Merab and Aljo in his way next. Landing a submission would be the perfect exercise and statement that he's ready for the belt. Very interesting. I think that's a interesting take. Andrew also says that Font ate some shots from Yanez. Yeah, I thought Yanez was doing well in that fight. But also, it does show that Rob Font has the power. He has the volume as well. If he hadn't been knocked down in a couple of those fights, and I know ifs and buts, if ifs and buts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. But in any case, Rob Font was getting off in volume in almost every fight he's had. Let's pull up UFC stats because I don't want to speak out of turn here. But Rob Font, very hard guy to outland in the UFC, historically speaking. So against Adrian Yanez, 33-25. Against Marlon Chito Vera, 271 to 159 in a fight that he lost clearly. Isn't that insane? Jose Aldo, 149 to 86. Rob Font outlanded him. He outlanded Garbrandt, 176 to 63. Moraes, 30-9. Simone, 90 to 59. So Sergio Pettis, 111 to 71. I have that whole block of fights from the Garbrandt fight to the Pettis fight all mapped out in my notes. And, Rob Font is a really sophisticated guy. He's put in a lot of time, effort, and energy. And he's 36 years old. So that's an interesting note, certainly. When you look at a guy like Rob Font, he came up from a BJJ background, and he hasn't really been able to, keep up with some guys in terms of his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the UFC. But I do think that, we could be seeing the best version of Rob Font in a long time. I'm trying to think when the last time that he was in the octagon was. It was definitely that Yanez fight. I'm trying to think exactly when the date was there. That was in April, and prior to that, he hadn't fought for a year. So yeah, he took some time off. He looked a little bit more refreshed in that Yanez fight, and I think that could be an interesting note here. But we also got to remember how they were treated by a common opponent, and what I'm talking about, of course, is the Chito Vera fight. Because last time out, Cory Sandhagen probably looked career best in absolutely dominating Chito Vera. It was a split decision, but I thought Cory Sandhagen deserved to win that fight. He did a lot of good work with his takedowns in that fight as well, using some stuff that I like, some unorthodox, unconventional, outside trips, stuff against the fence line. So, Cory's a guy who's continued to evolve, continued to show improvements, but he's also been, in these fights where I thought that Song Yadong was doing a great job landing clean shots on him, maybe getting ahead a little bit in that fight. And then he was able to finish him by cutting him and getting the doctor's intervention. But overall, I did think that that was a reason to think, maybe there could be some success in the boxing range. Song Yadong competes a lot at boxing range, and I think that Rob Font can compete from further away. So I think Rob, he's going to present some interesting challenges early in this fight, but I do think Sandhagen would be wise to try and grapple here. I think he does have some advantages in the wrestling and grappling that he could leverage, but on the feet, I do think it's a more honest fight than maybe the odds would imply. But Cory's a great fighter, so don't want to count him out, but we've seen him finish before. We've seen him hurt before, and I don't think that Rob Font is a guy to easily dismiss. But with that being said, folks, we can move along to the next fight here. Uh, I will just mention, guys, the last things that I said on Patreon earlier today, because I didn't mention these notes before. I said younger, similar size. Those are the things that tilt this towards Cory for me. He's also the better grappler with more diverse strikes. Font's got the potent jab, and I don't love the price in an elite bantamweight matchup. That was my closing thought here. So the next fight we're talking about is another really good fight. We've got Jessica Andrade. What is she, the most active fighter right now in women's MMA, taking on Tatiana Suarez here? And, I've talked about before my enjoyment of the power couple right now in MMA, Patchy Mix and Tatiana Suarez. And Patchy Mix, the New York boys will teach you how to wrestle once again. We've talked about it before. But look at what Magomedov did over the weekend, and look at what Patchy Mix did to him, right? Absolutely gave him the handles with that same guillotine choke this weekend. So I think when you're looking at her wrestling background, extremely rare for women's MMA, you also look at the fact that now she's coming back down to 115 pounds. Her last fight, I did think there was a little bit of ring rust that she was working out in that fight in the early going, but I also called the Tatiana Suarez sub there. And I actually said it was going to be a guillotine choke. And the reason I believe that was because Tatiana Suarez is a person that's very coachable. She's very skilled, and she's very, gifted in terms of her length, in terms of her limbs, in terms of how she's able to maneuver herself in the grappling. Look at the way she dominated somebody like Carla Esparza, and it'll tell you everything that you need to know about how good she is at moving through those positions. And I think when you look at somebody like Jessica Andrade, she's used to having a physicality advantage, and I do not believe she's going to have a physicality advantage in this fight. Do I think minus 700 is a fair indication? No, that's probably not fair because Tatiana has had some injuries. She's been out of the cage. Jessica Andrade is a girl who's competed at the championship level for a long time. Her last two fights that she lost, she was favored in both of those fights. So we shouldn't forget that. However, I think this is another really rough style matchup for her. I think how could we expect her to make massive improvements when she's just jumping right back into all these fights so consistently? And I think when you look at somebody who's going to challenge her, they have to be able to compete with her in the wrestling and grappling and make it uncomfortable. We saw that with Erin Blanchfield, where I cashed a ticket on Erin Blanchfield. I've cashed tickets on Jessica Andrade on her in her favor. I bet her by sub against Amanda Lemos. But I think styles make fights. And I think in this fight, she's not going to be the superior grappler. I think that's going to be Tatiana Suarez. So I think eventually, probably in the first or second round, Tatiana Suarez is going to win this fight via submission. And, I hate to say that about a former champion. I do think Jessica Andrade is alive to win this fight by knockout. She's a very dangerous fighter. She comes out with a lot of aggression. She can definitely scare people off, but this is a woman who's undefeated for a reason. I feel like if she had not dealt with cancer and other things outside the cage, she would have fought for UFC titles. She's beaten UFC champions. And I think that Tatiana Suarez is real deal Holyfield. I just think she's very, very good at fighting. I think she's very equipped with all the skills. And I think there's a reason bookmakers opened her so big. They want to write tickets on Andrade, in my opinion. And it's not to say that Andrade can't win. It's just to say, I think they know that very sharp people will come in and hammer Tatiana Suarez because she's been so dangerous, so dominant throughout her UFC run. And until proven otherwise, she's a very difficult fighter to bet against. And so I understand people taking the shot here on Andrade at the huge plus money. There are some unknowns, but as far as I'm concerned, you really see somebody who is fantastic at implementing her grappling game plan each and every time out in Tatiana Suarez. And I think that she's really physical. So I feel like that's a fight that more often than not plays out really bad for Jessica Andrade because she likes to have fights where she's the bully, where she's coming on, where she feels like she could bear down on an opponent. And I just don't think that that's the kind of fight that she's going to have here. I think she's going to be surprised by the physicality as well. So for me, Mr. D points out another thing that we talked about. Short notice. Don't love to see that at all. Jessica is a girl that is very willing to take on risk. We saw that when she turned around a month after winning the title and then got knocked out brutally by running face first into a punch from Weili Zhang in China. She's willing to take on insane amounts of risk for money, attention, acclaim, and opportunity. And I think, she's had a lot of UFC fights. She's had a lot of UFC wins. She's had titles. What does she really want in this fight, except to maybe just keep the ball rolling, keep saying yes, keep being a company woman, and keep the contracts going. And I think that Suarez is just too dangerous. I don't think she's somebody that you could take on short notice, take lightly. I just don't believe that. So for now, I'm going to roll with Tatiana Suarez. In terms of how I viewed this, number one, we'll talk about the opener. It opened minus 700 on BetOnline down to minus 350. So definitely some movement here. Definitely some change in implied in this fight. Don't know why we're experiencing some blips with the internet, but trying to keep it rolling here, folks. Think that we should be back. So now, the next fight that we're going to discuss is Nzechukwu and Jacoby. So if you guys have an opinion on that fight, go ahead and fire that off in the chat. But the last things that I'll mention is what I brought up on Patreon. I want to see Suarez's weight cut here. If it goes well, going back to 115 pounds, that's a question mark here. But if it does, I think it's going to be a Suarez win. Dominant wrestler, rapidly improving, dangerous grappler, dating patchy mix. Suarez from an elite wrestling background, absurd physicality. Don't like Andrade's frequency of competition. She's fighting too much, losing, and not going back to the drawing board. She was favored in her last two losses and now is a big dog taking early action. Curious to see where the line ends up. So, there is a point at which I would think you may come back in on the Suarez side here, but it's not at this point for me. I'd rather wait and see how much dog action that they write on Andrade. I think it will be significant. But for me, I'm just going to sit back here, wait for the prop market to open up because I've been very good at betting Andrade. I've been very good at betting Suarez, and I've done well, particularly on the prop market there. So that's probably where I'm going to look to continue betting. But, I'll wait and see. And I want to see that weight cut as well, like I mentioned. So next up, this is a really tricky one because we've got Dustin Jacoby. Talk about back up against the wall. The guy's got 2 losses in a row in very close fights. He's taking on Kennedy Nzechukwu, who is instead on a 3-fight win streak here. So it's put up or shut up time for Dustin Jacoby. And Dustin's been fighting for a long time, fought Alex Pereira in kickboxing. He's a guy that at his best throws a lot of volume, gets off with a lot of shots, looks like a guy who can really outperform people on the feet. And the one fight that stands out to me is the fight that they had against a common opponent in Daun Jung, right? Where Dustin Jacoby goes out there and flatlines him in the first round. And on the other side, Kennedy Nzechukwu got absolutely flatlined in the first round. A guy who's very durable historically in Kennedy Nzechukwu. So that was very interesting as far as I saw it, where both of these guys, had a really different experience against a common opponent. But on the other side, Kennedy Nzechukwu is a guy who looks like he's getting better each and every fight out. He's only 31 years of age. He's got huge intangible advantages, height, reach, and age here. So I did ultimately have to lean towards the Nzechukwu side here. I'm not terribly bullish on this fight. I said tricky fight between 2 light heavyweights, a lot of inherent volatility. Kennedy has the plus attributes. He trains with Fortis MMA, which is a gym that I value. But we've got Factory X Muay Thai, Mark Montoya, another good gym for Dustin Jacoby. But he's 35 years of age here. So he's not a young guy in the division. He's had a lot of fight, got knocked out brutally by Pereira back in the day, and he hasn't been getting knocked out in the UFC, but he did get hurt by Maxime Grishin and a couple other guys. So he's definitely been tested in his chin. I think Nzechukwu is a bit hittable. And against a former kickboxing guy, that's a little bit concerning, and it makes me look towards the under potentially. If Nzechukwu sub is a ridiculous price, that could be interesting because I do think Jacoby is a minus grappler at this level. And I think that Nzechukwu has all the right attributes. Last fight showed that he's starting to look for submissions, and I do think that it could potentially be mispriced here again. So that's something I'll be looking at. And I also said the KO win for Jacoby versus a common opponent is enough to give me pause here because you did see Nzechukwu open as a plus 105 underdog here, and he has been turned into a minus 140 favorite. So I think there's a chance that Nzechukwu gets knocked out, but I also think there's probably a better chance that eventually he paces this guy down the stretch. So for me, I'm kind of leaning towards this fight not going. But conversely, my guy Cheeky Elbow says fight goes the distance for him. So we've got a couple different opinions here. We've got SD Crusader says Jacoby has looked awful lately. As long as Kennedy didn't somehow regress, I think he wins this easy. Fair play there. Jay Breezy says Suarez, Sandhagen fight starts round 2, and Phillips starts round 2. Okay, interesting. Andrew says, bro is a punching bag. If Kennedy wrestles, he looks minus 300. I think that's a good idea. And yeah, man, I do lean towards Kennedy here. But, we have seen Jacoby can get off on low kicks and a bunch of offense early in fights sometimes. We've got Jacoby versus Mirzakhanov maybe scream at the TV when he went for a takedown in the third. Yeah, man, I like Mirzakhanov, overall as a prospect. I feel like he's kind of been underrated a little bit. Kennedy, my lock of the week ski, says Bailey. Shout out, Bailey. Best of luck to you. Daun Jung hit the Joker card with that KO of Kennedy. Yeah, man, he really might have just got a little bit on the lucky side of things there. But, for me, that was just a fight that made me misread Daun Jung's level of power. I thought he was going to beat Dustin Jacoby, and instead he ended up getting flatlined. But that's also a fight that speaks to the inherent volatility at light heavyweight. Kennedy, all you heard in the lead up to that fight was how durable he was, and then he got knocked out by Daun Jung of all people very quickly. So it's the fight game. Anybody can get clipped here, but I think Kennedy and Nzechukwu, he's just got more intangibles. He probably should be favored here. So for me, I like the Kennedy side, but not super bullish on the fight overall. We can move to the next fight here. And I've been pretty chalky in my predictions so far, but I'm kind of having second thoughts about this guy, Diego Lopes, who's favored here. And, there's definitely a chance he could flatline Gavin Tucker. And I could let you guys know, Gavin Tucker has let me down before. So if you guys want to know the fastest I've ever lost a bet, I've been betting for a long time. I believe the fastest that I ever lost a bet was when my guy Gavin Tucker got one punch knocked out by Dan Ige. And Dan Ige does have real power. But I never expected the fight to go like that. I thought there was going to be more exchanges. I thought there was going to be more wrestling. I thought he was going to get to show his game, and he really didn't get to. So for me, the biggest concern, the biggest liability that Gavin Tucker has as a fighter is his chin. And I'm not sure that Diego Lopes is the best guy to test somebody's chin right now in MMA, because you look, he's got 8 wins by knockout. His most recent knockout win in MMA was against Kenneth Glenn, a 10-8 fighter in Fury FC in the 3rd round. Prior to that, he had a loss via knockout against Amir Elzakurev in ACB, and he has a couple ground and pound wins, but he's not a guy that's known for his striking. He's actually a grappling coach for, what is it, Lobo Gym, I believe? Yes, he's a Lobo Gym coach, and he's a guy that has a good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. He's very dangerous, and I actually bet him very small against Movsar Evloev. Capping service says I was on Lopes sub against Evloev, and he's on Tucker here. My brother in freaking Christ. I absolutely love to hear this. Let me tell you why I'm so excited to hear this capping service. I have not bet Gavin Tucker, but I'm definitely looking at it. And it's because when Gavin Tucker opened, he's a minus 141 favorite. Odds makers are seeing what I'm seeing, which is the fact that Diego Lopes in 2 UFC fights has given up 7 takedowns. And the fact that he's giving up 7 takedowns against a guy in Gavin Tucker who has scored, I believe, 15 takedowns in the UFC, I'm not going to sleep on that. And my guy Andrew says Aleksa Grasso's BJJ coach. Absolutely. I was betting on him against Movsar Evloev, not for a huge bet, for a small bet. And I thought he won the fight. But in any case, Movsar Evloev is kind of a guy who does a little bit of shutdown wrestling. He doesn't really get off on much offense. When you look at Gavin Tucker, the opposite is true. He had a fight with Billy Quarantillo where he landed over 100 significant strikes and 7 takedowns. So when Gavin Tucker doesn't get knocked out or clipped in the first round by Ricky Glenn and then beaten all over the octagon, he's a very dangerous fighter who can get takedowns, who could be very slick, who could fight well at range. He does not have all the physical intangibles that you want. He's not the longest guy. He's not the tallest guy, but he is a Renzo Gracie, Halifax, Nova Scotia black belt, and he's very legit on the ground, and he has beaten good guys in the UFC, and he's gotten a bunch of takedowns. So from a standpoint of just how you envision the matchup, I envision Gavin Tucker getting takedowns in this fight. And it's very hard to submit Gavin Tucker. He's never been submitted in MMA. And there's been a couple fights where, Gavin Tucker was supposed to fight really good grapplers and it just didn't end up working out. But it's like he's willing to take on these guys. And I feel like Gavin Tucker is a dangerous, dangerous fight. He's one of the best fighters from Canada. I'm comfortable making that claim as well. And so I think shout out to my guy, J. Cole MMA. Shout out to all the Canadians, the Canucks out there. Everybody who's repping for the Great White North, because I really feel like this guy is a dangerous guy, Gavin Tucker. And I don't think he's a slouch, and he has taken a bunch of time off. The only things I don't like to see are injuries and this and that, but I did the Instagram stock before I said this. I feel like the guy looks like he's healthy. I feel like he looks like he's in good shape. I feel like he looks like he's getting great work, bringing in the right training partners. He's constantly rolling. He's constantly training. He's constantly getting work in on the pads. And this is the other thing, SD Crusader. I brought this up in my breakdown. Don't like betting on a 37-year-old featherweight, but he doesn't have that many fight miles. I like him here. That's kind of how I feel as well. So for me, let me start, going back to this Patreon breakdown a little bit that I did earlier, because I never want to miss a thought that I already had. And I did a bunch of research earlier, so don't want to miss anything here. I said Tucker has burnt me before. His chin is suspect with a 0-3 knockdown ratio in the division, especially at his age. But the reason that this is compelling matchmaking is because Lopes only has 8 wins via KO as a professional, and none, frankly, were over high-quality competition. Both men are black belts, with Lopes teaching at the Lobo Gym in Mexico and Tucker studying under Renzo Gracie, Halifax, Nova Scotia. Tucker is one of the best Canadians on the roster. 2 losses to Ricky Glenn, where he got hurt early and fought like a dog, by the way. Never quit in that fight, even though he was completely hurt. And then on top of that, he went out there and just got chinned in the first minute by Dan Ige. And that really doesn't tell you a lot about how good he is at fighting. It's just unfortunate. He got caught. Brutal, tough result, but that's the sport, And at the end of the day, if it had happened to Dan Ige, it would have looked like the bet of the century, but it wasn't a good bet because Dan Ige had the better hardware, longer guy, for sure. But Dan Ige also has knockouts, a bunch of them prior to coming to the UFC. So the idea that he could win a fight by knockout is something that we shouldn't have ruled out there. Diego Lopes is a guy that's not that dangerous on the feet primarily. So I definitely think it's a volatile fight, but I'm curious to see how far this line creeps up on Gavin Tucker, because I will be interested potentially on a small underdog shot here, depending on where this line moves to. But definitely think Gavin Tucker is live to win the fight. And my gut lean is to pick him outright. So I said I think Lopes is live to win by KO because of his chin and his age. But skill for skill, I think Tucker should have better wrestling and technical striking on the feet. Tucker landed over 100 significant strikes, 7 takedowns against Billy Quarantillo, proving that he has 15 minutes worth of cardio to fight at a high pace. Not playing at current odds, but I could see myself betting Tucker before the end of the week if the line keeps moving towards Lopes. That is the end of my breakdown. But I'm not saying that he's not dangerous on the feet, but I do think that he can get taken down frequently in this fight. He's a guy who's willing to play off his back, and I just don't think he's going to submit Gavin Tucker. So for me, that is how I feel, and maybe I change my mind when I do my research throughout the week. But I'm telling you guys, Gavin Tucker's a pretty damn good fighter, man. And when he's not hurt in the early going, he's won a pretty impressive list of UFC fights. Let's talk about Gavin Tucker's wins really quick before we switch off. Billy Quarantillo, Justin James, not that great a win. Sung Woo Choi, good win. Sam Cecilia, that was all the way back in 2017. So he's a guy who hasn't had that many fights. That's the other big concern here. But for me, I think that Gavin is still training really hard. I think he's still a good fighter, so I'm not going to rule him out completely. You see, this is a funny one. Let's talk about that because I think that this is a correlated outcome. I think if this fight goes over, it is more than likely a win for Gavin Tucker. I think that if this fight goes under, it is more than likely a win for Diego Lopes. I think that that is probably correlated. And Andrew says he would like to see Billy Q versus Lopes. I think that would be cool. And I actually think, Lopes would present a lot of problems there potentially because Billy Q, he's a guy that he likes to have a grappling advantage over his opponents. So I think that, yeah, Tucker is plus 145 on Bet Online, but he opened minus 141 on Bet Online. So he has flipped completely in this fight from a minus 140 to a plus 145. There's a couple fights on this card that have flipped as far as I remember. So definitely some good stuff to dig into. But I think this is an interesting fight. And I think Lopes is a guy who's still young and still coming into his own. I think he's going to win a bunch of fights in the UFC. But there's something that we always talked about when I was wrestling coming up. My coach used to say, like, there's no such thing as a good loss. It could be good that you went out there and got the experience and that and whatever, but you never want to get into that mindset. And so sometimes you look at somebody's record in decisions and you ask yourself, is that a problem? Is that something that's going to hold them back? And this guy, Diego Lopes, is 2-4 in decisions. So if you look at the prop markets that came out early on the offshores, Gavin Tucker is favored to win this fight if it goes to decision. However, in every other finish market, they're favoring Diego Lopes. So basically, it's a binary fight in some ways. But I think that Tucker is definitely live to win this fight, but no bet for me at this point. Interesting stuff. And let's move here to the next fight, guys. We've got Tanner Boser, another Canadian, taking on Aleksa Camur in a fight for, maybe a job here at 205 pounds because both guys been on some hard times, definitely more pronounced for Tanner, the bulldozer Boser here, coming in with a 20-10-1 record, 1-4 in his last 5 fights. He was knocked out in the first round in his trip down to 205 pounds for the first time, fighting Iwan Kutalaba. He got clipped in that fight. He was trying to get back up to his feet, but he ended up getting dropped there. And, he ended up getting hurt when he was trying to get back up. And he fought tough, but it just wasn't very good performance. Made me question a little bit how he's going to look at 205 pounds, if he's going to be able to hang there, because his finishing upside isn't huge. He does have 2 finish wins against Felipe Lins before he got back on the sauce, in my humble opinion. And then gets Rafael Pessoa, who's a guy who I don't believe, fared very well in the UFC yet, ended up flaming out, and he is on a 4-fight losing streak, starting with that Tanner Boser result. So he's a guy who's really not been, beating high quality opponents via finish in the UFC. Even the finish over OSP came at a time when OSP was on hard times, and OSP fell to 25-16 in that fight, 16th professional loss there for OSP at 38 years of age. And we talk about how likely people are to be knocked out at 38 years of age. So he knocked out a couple of old guys, but he lost to Ilir Latifi, Andre Arlovsky. And the thing that stands out about Tanner Boser, unfortunately, is that he goes a lot to the legs. He does a lot of damage to the legs. He really struggles to get off on the big shots that have done, convincing to the judges. And he's a guy who's getting taken down frequently. And then when he has fights on the feet against guys like Andre Arlovsky and he outlands them, he still is not getting the judges' approval. So he's a guy that just doesn't seem to inspire the judges. For me, when you look at the Aleksa Camur side, guys, I have to say, I'm not extremely impressed. He's a guy who hasn't fought in that in a little bit of time, but I also want to give him the credit that he's a young enough guy that he could come back here and have made big improvements. He had one surgery, I believe, in his off time here, but he hasn't fought since 2021, where he outlanded Nikolai Negumereanu and lost a split decision there. And honestly, that one probably could have went his way, but he's just not super convincing, and a little bit of the cardio dynamic didn't look great. He got out wrestled by William Knight. That's not a great look, but William Knight, extremely physical guy, and Camur is a guy who came into the UFC way too soon. He's very young, very inexperienced here, relative to a guy like Tanner Boser. Tanner Boser comes in with way more experience. But here's some of my notes from my breakdown here. Tanner Boser can be a fun fighter, but he's struggling to maintain a UFC level. He lost 4 of his last 5 fights, including a KO one. He used to compete at heavyweight. Now he's dropping to light heavyweight, where he's 0-1 in his new weight class. He was losing at heavyweight, but the fights were contentious split decisions that he lost based on wrestling. Now he's on the last fight of his contract. He's talking shit about the Rock's shoes. You guys got to remember, like, the UFC don't like stuff like that. He's talking bad about the sponsors. He's talking bad about other stuff. Then he said, I said, Boser's style is unfavorable to judges, that he lost fights to Nascimento, Arlovsky, and Latifi, despite outlanding each one of those guys by 25 or more significant strikes. So how many strikes does Tanner Boser need as a handicap before he wins the fight by decision? Like 30, 40, 50? Because the guy is just not winning these fights, even when he's outlanding people by 25 strikes. That's hard to bet on, and especially as a big favorite here, again, on the strength of a 1-4 resume against a guy who's younger than him. And let's look at Aleksa Camur and his physical intangibles here. He's going to be about the same size as Tanner Boser. So he's coming down from heavyweight to light heavyweight, making some amount of a cut here. Not a big cut, though, from what he said in his interview with James Lynch, I believe. And, he's only going to have a 1.5-inch reach advantage and a 1-inch height advantage here against a guy who's 5 years younger. So Boser's definitely got the experience, and he's fighting for his contract with his back up against the wall. But I think, the UFC was just as happy to cut him, and he said he wanted to fight out his contract, so they gave him another fight against a guy who's been on hard times. And I think the UFC, with no disrespect, would kind of prefer that Aleksa Camur clears him out of this division. So, I'm not super confident in either guy in this fight, but I kind of just feel like Aleksa Camur has a little bit more upside here. He opened a plus 160 dog. He's down to a plus 135. And, when you look at Camur, he's 27 years of age, out of the octagon over a year, could be in much better form. I'm not bullish on the fight because of the unknowns. Camur just projects higher to me. Not a good fighter yet, but he's young. He's got strong style. He's coming up under Stipe. He's fought in close proximity to good guys for a long time. So, Camur's a guy who maybe could take that step forward, whereas Tanner Boser's had 30 fights. He couldn't wrestle before he got to the UFC. I've got notes on the what's the name of that guy that he fought over in Russia? The Dennis Smolderov fight, man, he couldn't wrestle back then, and he can't wrestle so great now. And, it's no disrespect, but just for some people, it comes more naturally than others. I could just tell you from personal experience, Aleksa Camur, strong style MMA, there's good wrestlers that come in and out of that gym. Northeast Ohio is a hotbed of good wrestling, and Tanner Boser is not a good wrestler. So I think if they have, a couple brain cells to rub together over there, they're going to say, hey, guys, let's go shoot some takedowns here. Let's get on top of this guy. Let's use our physicality. Let's use our youth and our ability to go out there and push a pace. Because, again, we've seen Aleksa Camur get takedowns in fights where he wasn't out-wrestled. So he was definitely out-wrestled by William Knight. Tanner Boser, no William Knight, with no disrespect in terms of the physicality. Certainly not from what we've seen so far. But Brecksville Broadview Heights, is putting out national qualifiers, national champions, and All-Americans at the college level. So it's just very, very quality wrestling is right in that area. Nothing to sleep on here. I would think that Camur might wrestle his way to a decision here, and Boser's chin is a little bit questionable to me. I want to see exactly how quickly he's turning around here from that Cutelaba fight. Yeah, man, guys, that was in April. Right, he's getting dropped in April. He's turning right back around here. And Camur's a guy who said, posted a couple of times. I looked at his Instagram as well. He said, I want to fight. I'm ready to fight. I'm ready to go. And he says he's ready to go right now. He's been waiting, preparing, getting ready, long camp, type of deal. And for Tanner Boser, he's been very active, but he just got knocked out in April and he's right back in the ring. And Poatan was getting hurt by some left hooks from Jan Blachowicz, right? It's like when you get right back in after you get KO'd, you never know how your chin's going to take it. And it could be costly. So something to keep in the back of our minds here. Want to shout out to 81 people rocking with us live. Want to shout out to our guy, Alex Ramirez, the general in the chat, says press the like button. Please do that. Really appreciate when you guys do. Helps me out. And I'm here to try and help you guys out. Give you guys my first look at these fights. Before things start getting steamed out and going crazy. And I'm not always going to get it right, but I'm always going to be here giving you guys my looks at the beginning of the week, circling back after I've done my research, and always being accountable. So wasn't my week last week. You can find all my work on betmma.tips, track every one of my bets. Didn't work out this time, but it's straight back to work for me. Hundreds of pages of notes for the next couple cards ready to go. And that's what I do. I get right back to work and find the next winner. So next up, let's look at another fight on this card because that fight is pretty ugly. I'm not very bullish on the fight overall. Man, we got a fun one here to close out the main card discussion, but to kick off the main card in terms of our watching on Saturday night, it's going to be Ignacio Bahamondes taking on Ludovit Klein, and it seems like we're getting a lot of action two ways on this fight. I think we've got two interesting lightweight prospects here. Ludovit Klein came into the UFC as a 145-pound fighter. He took on Michael Trizano. He lost that fight as a big favorite. He took on Shane Young. He won that fight by knockout in the first round. He does have a good left high kick. However, I think it's going to be hard for him to get off on his high kicks against a guy this tall in Ignacio Bahamondes. But let's talk about the fact that he also got submitted in the third round by Nate the Train Landwehr. And that was when he decided, I'm going to move up. I'm going to see if I can test myself at 155 pounds here. And we saw him go out there, get the split decision win as an underdog where I bet him against Devontae Smith. Then he went out there as a big dog against Mason Jones. I did not go back to the well with him there, and he got it done again. Gets the win over Mason Jones, sends him packing from the UFC. So really interesting spot here for Ludovit Klein because he is another underdog coming into this fight. And Ignacio Bahamondes, pretty big favorite here. But Ignacio Bahamondes has also been putting together a good run in the UFC. Let's talk about his run. Loses a split decision. In my opinion, he deserved to lose that fight, but it was a fun, competitive scrap with John McDessie. He was a little too hittable there. He went out there to have a war, a fight of the night type fight. He landed a lot of damaging shots, but later down the stretch, McDessie showed his veteran savvy, beat him up with precise boxing techniques down the pocket, found him with big shots and really hurt him at various points with his boxing attack. But since then, what have we seen from him? Went out there, got the huge win against Roosevelt Roberts. That was a beautiful shot. Won that fight as an underdog. Really interesting striking techniques, really dynamic, and Valley Flow, right? Just like Yair Rodriguez, just like our guy Bilal Muhammad, and all these guys that are, really starting to make waves in the UFC. Valley Flow striking, very good, Jim. Very good skill set that you see from a lot of their fighters. So unorthodox, definitely wild techniques, but also dangerous. Definitely stuff that can put you out, that can finish you. Goes out there, finds the third round submission against Zhu Rong Zhu, however you want to pronounce that, as a big favorite in the same price range, minus 210. Went out there and got the win. Last time out there, catchweight fight, minus 400. Goes out there and gets the decision win against Trey Ogden. So you're seeing Ignacio Bahamondes. Since that first fight against John McDessie, he's been going out there and getting the wins, delivering. However, it hasn't always been smooth sailing. The Trey Ogden fight was a decision, but it was still a clean win for him in the end. So I think it's a really interesting fight. I think that maybe minus 200 is a little bit ambitious, but I'm going to check. I'm going to see if I like what I see from Ludovit Klein. To tell you the truth, he looks like he's on all the sauce in the world. When I look at his pictures on Instagram, the guy looks like he's been training, getting jacked. He's 5'8" at 155 pounds. So that means my man is able to put on a lot of muscle here. He's able to get jacked for these fights. And I think that he is definitely a guy you don't want to sleep on. Let's pull up my betmma.tips and see how I've done betting on Ludovit Klein. But I feel like I've been profitable betting both of these guys, if my memory serves, but not tremendously so. So I don't feel like this is a fight I want to get crazy invested in. Let's see how I've done. So Ignacio Bahamondes, I have not done so well with. I have been trying to bet these fights to end by sub. Um, actually, I bet Zhu wrong by sub and he got submitted. So then the next time I had the good sense to bet ends by sub and the fight went to decision. But in any case, I think that it was Ludovit Klein that I've done really well with, if my memory serves. So let's pull that up. It's a beautiful thing about Bet MMA tips as well as you can pull up your old results and see, if you've had a good read or a bad read on a fighter. It's important stuff to remember. Shane Young, I bet against Ludovit Klein for 1 unit at plus 112. He got head kicked into another dimension. That was the last time I ever bet on Shane Young. Mike Trezano, I bet as a dog plus 215. And then I bet Ludovit Klein bigly, 3 units at plus 172 against Devontae Smith, and he came through in that spot for me. So definitely like to see that. I've given away some prop plays on Ludovit Klein. I thought he was going to beat Nate Landwehr, and I thought he was going to beat Devontae Smith inside the distance. So a couple missed shots there on the prop market, but in any case, excuse me, we got to remember that Ludovit Klein also had the draw with Jai Herbert, and Andrew points out he struggled with the length. I think that's a great read, and I really think that Ignacio Bahamondes is probably going to struggle with the wrestling at some point in this fight. He might get taken down. But I think his length, I think his ability to get back up to his feet, and I think his ability to outpace Ludovit Klein over the course of 15 minutes could be the deciding factor. Because truthfully, I think Klein's going to look like a live underdog throughout. But you look at the fact this guy's got 2 round 3 finishes so far in the UFC, and Ludovit Klein, to me, tends to slow down a little bit over the course of his fights. And, think about the Trezano fight where he got takedowns and the judges didn't reward that fact because he wasn't able to get off with enough damage on top. I think that Ignacio Bahamondes could win the damage positions in this fight. And I think that he's a guy that really knows how to scrap. He's a big body. I think he's difficult to really muscle around for too long. And I just think that some of the tools that we normally see really succeed for Ludovit Klein, like the big high kick, for example, they're going to really struggle to get off in this fight. And I think that the better kicker is going to be Ignacio Bahamondes. So give me Ignacio Bahamondes as my early lean. Let's talk about what I put in the Patreon preview. Klein is an interesting challenge for Bahamondes because he'll mix in takedown attempts. He has some power in the striking, and he's another young international prospect. He's the first Slovakian fighter in the UFC. However, Bahamondes, Chilean fighter by way of Valley Flow Striking. Klein is training at Spartacus Fight Gym in Slovakia. He seems like he's on insane peds, but Bahamondes looks like he's in good shape too, training with Bilal and Yair. Klein's a southpaw with some ability to wrestle, but I think Bahamondes eventually wears him down and catches him. Probably going to keep an eye on round 3 props. So just like I said, guys, I kind of feel like Bahamondes might struggle a little bit early, but I think he's live to come on late in this fight and get the win and potentially the finish. So that I might be looking at an over here as well. I'm curious what the over is priced in this fight. But I feel like this fight might end up going over and be a little contrarian in that way. So I'll be curious to see what that price is like. Next up, let's take a look here, folks. Oh, this is an interesting one. We got Auni Barcelos back to take on Kyler Phillips. Fun fight here, but Auni Barcelos, another guy making a really quick turnaround after getting flatlined in the first round. Umar Nurmagomedov knocked him out in January. First round knockout, left hook, brutal knockout there from Umar Nurmagomedov. He was supposed to be on this fight card in the headlining role. Unfortunately, not going to make it like the rest of the contingency from over there. No speculation for me because I don't know all the facts yet. But you look at Hani Barcelos, he's definitely been on hard times in his last 5 fights since November of 2020. His only 2 wins are Trevin Jones and Khalid Taha. His losses are to Timur Valiev, Victor Henry, and Umar Nurmagomedov. And Victor Henry absolutely whooped his ass, landed way more strikes, just got off on way more volume, and Umar knocked him out in the first round, So I feel like Hani Barcelos still a great fighter, still a fun guy, but Kyler Phillips seems like the wrong guy for him to be taking at this time for me personally. Kyler Phillips opened minus 200. He's minus 210 right now. When I last checked, maybe that's changed a little bit. He's coming in on short notice. Is that true? Let's check here and see. He had a canceled bout with Miles Johns due to injury. So it does seem like he was ready to take a fight. But yeah, it seems like somebody's on short notice here, if my guy is correct. So let's take a look at the fight card overall and see if I could find a canceled bout here. So we've got, Said Nurmagomedov withdrew and Hani Barcelos took the fight on short notice. Very interesting stuff here. So I didn't even know that fact, and I was still picking Kyler Phillips. But in any case, let's talk about it. I said Hani Barcelos, certainly a live underdog in the extent that he's skilled everywhere. That being said, Phillips lost a majority decision to Hellion Paiva. I bet Paiva decision there, by the way. But he otherwise could be undefeated in the UFC. And I thought that was a very dicey fight that could have went either way. I didn't think it was a runaway for Paiva by any means. Phillips has a unanimous decision win over Song Yadong that has aged like fine wine, but he has been unable to capitalize and build momentum. His last win over Marcelo Rojo was a sweet round 3 sub that cashed as a plus 550 wins by sub ticket, but he hasn't competed since, and that was last February. Phillips trains at the lab in Arizona, good gym, getting in work with a lot of good guys, a lot of good bantamweights training out there in Arizona. 1 inch taller, 5-inch reach advantage here, according to Tapology. He's making talking now about Barcelos, he's making a 6-month turnaround after getting flatlined in the first round. He's getting hit more cleanly each fight. And at 36 years old as a bantamweight, we have to start asking hard questions about his durability and his staying power in the division. Phillips is only 28 years of age here. He should be coming back refreshed, and he's a dangerous fighter. So for me, I think Kyler Phillips probably gets the win in this fight. And I think that Frank is probably right here. Unfortunately, sad, but Frank Vituli says, this is the UFC suggesting that Howney retire by giving him Umar and then Phillips. Yeah, man, I kind of feel the same way. But it's, again, Howney's asking for this fight. He said he wanted to be in there, but unfortunately, I just think that Kyler Phillips, probably the wrong guy at the wrong time. Very fast, very dynamic. Fought a lot of tough guys already, so I don't think this is going to be anything that he can't handle. And I think that he's dangerous to win this fight, by any method of victory. Matt R. Shout out to Matt R. Very good patron as well. He says, did you see the short notice replacement for Woodson? I didn't get a chance to look into him deeply. Seems like he has a very good record, but that will be something that I do look into in the very near future. It will be something that I upload in terms of notes to Patreon early, and then I will also make sure I discuss that in full on the Bets and Banter show. But that was actually announced like right before I was going to go live, and I didn't have enough time to watch it. I was already late as it is. So unfortunately, guys, I didn't get a chance to look into that new replacement, but I will be happy to look into that. And I do have some notes on Sean Woodson as well. So I will send those to the patrons overnight, before I get into too much else. So let's move to the next fight here, because we've got another fun fight to talk about at 170 pounds. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of the depth here, guys. We got a lot of a lot of fun fights. We're now on the preliminary portion of this card, and we've got Kyler Phillips, and then we've got Jeremiah Wells versus Carlston Harris. These are two guys that have both had a lot of success in the UFC's welterweight division, and somebody needs to take a step up. Somebody needs to take a step forward. For me, I'm looking at unders in this fight. I'm looking at somebody getting violently finished. Look at the two guys in this fight. You got one guy in Carlston Harris who's a dangerous finisher, who's got excellent submissions, who's very dangerous with his hands, who's got some fun kicks as well, who could be extremely dynamic, but he could also be loosey-goosey with his hands. He could be caught on the feet. He's been knocked out twice in brutal fashion, pre-UFC, in the UFC. Jeremiah Wells has nasty power. Renzo Gracie Philly knows how to get down, knows how to grapple, knows how to move in every position. I feel like these guys are going to bang it out. I feel like somebody's going to fall. And I think it's going to be an absolutely crazy war and a banger while it lasts. And let's talk about the fact that both these guys are 36 years of age here. So nobody's got the age advantage here necessarily. Technically, Jeremiah Wells is about 9 months older, but really we're parsing hairs there. You talk about the fact that 3 inches of height is going to go to Carlston Harris, 2 inches of reach is going to go to Carlston Harris here. But I think that Carlston Harris, the one thing that may get to him here is the power of Wells and his ability to mix it up. Because I would not be surprised if the fact that Carlston is so long prompts a guy like Wells to shoot takedowns and take a guy like Carlston Harris to the mat. And Carlston normally initiates grappling sequences from the feet where he locks up his choke series, where he's got that extremely dangerous front headlock, where he's got that extremely dangerous front choke series. But I do think to myself constantly that Carlston Harris keeps his chin quite high on the feet. Somebody like Jeremiah Wells could potentially take advantage of that. But also height differences in these fights allow people to get to your hips. And I think that Jeremiah Wells has shown in his recent fights, he's been getting hurt a little bit on the feet, but he's also been able to get these guys to the freaking ground with takedowns. And so I think that cheeky elbow brings up a great question that I ask myself. How much does Carlston have off his back when he gets taken down? I think that's a fascinating question. And I think it's an interesting one to ask here. The other thing is Jeremiah Wells, he's never been finished before. Carlston Harris has been finished on multiple occasions. So for me, that's why I have to favor, Jeremiah Wells here. I did watch the Shavkat fight, as a matter of fact, and Shavkat absolutely brutally knocked him out in that fight. That was one of the weirdest, brutal knockouts you'll see with the spinning kick before. My guy Matt R says he likes the over. He thinks Wells top times him for most of 3 rounds. I would just say, man, Wells can definitely, you know, and potentially I gotta go back and watch the Shavkat fight if he's stuffing a bunch of takedowns. But I will say Shavkat's not a guy that commits fully to a grappling style game plan. He's fully willing to strike it out with people on the feet. He's got an even balance of knockouts and submissions. So I think that it's going to be an interesting fight. I'm not ruling out that Harris could get back up to his feet. Make no mistake. My biggest lean here is towards the under, but I just think that Jeremiah Wells is a guy who's kind of got that consistent game, kind of meat and potatoes, but he can knock you out on the feet. He could take you down to the mat. And you go back and look, I was really impressed with that. What's the guy's name? He just fought Jack Della. Hafez. When you go back and watch Jeremiah Wells and Hafez, they fought to an insane draw where they wrestled hard, fought really hard for the full 15 minutes. So for me, I'm curious if Carlston Harris can push the same 15-minute pace here. And if he can push a really hard 15-minute pace and defend all the takedowns, then maybe his length and his power on the feet is what ends up drawing out the win. But for me, I just think this is an absolute banger of a fight. And I prefer, instead of taking the minus 160 on the money line, give me the minus 160 on the under 2.5. Because I think it's a violent fight that's going to end inside the distance here more often than not. Let's talk about the Patreon breakdown here. First thing I said was I think I like the under 2.5 more than either side, both dangerous fighters. I like Wells because he could take folks down and control them. He could blast people out of there on the feet, and he could fight hard for 15 minutes. Wells and recent UFC newcomer Basil Hafez had an absolute war on the regional scene that ended in a draw, and Wells has continued to impress in the big show. Harris got bunked by Shavkat Rakhmonov and brutally finished when he bounced back. But he bounced back, with a win over Jerry Gordon by unanimous decision. Harris is a dangerous fighter in all phases, but Wells is competent on the mat. He's also short, stocky, and difficult to get a hold of. I assume Harris could KO him on the feet, but Wells has never been KO'd, and Harris has been multiple times in the first round. So give me Wells here. I think he blasts him out in a 1-round classic. That's truly how I feel. I think somebody is going to get finished here. I think it's going to be a really crazy fight. But if my guy Matt R is the genius that foresees this fight going to decision, I'm going to give him all the credit in the world here because being contrarian can get you paid in this game. But I just think both these guys are so dangerous. And I do think that they're both flawed enough as fighters at 36 years of age. Either one of these guys could make a critical error and lose the fight. So for me, should be a fun banger, and I like the under personally. Next up, guys, we got Billy Quarantillo, very fun fighter, New York's own Billy the Squid, stand up, taking on Damon Jackson. And unfortunately, guys, this is one case where I do not think I will be making a case for the New York boy teaching somebody how to wrestle, because Damon Jackson knows how to wrestle, boys and girls. Damon Jackson really knows how to get down. He opens a plus 150 dog in this spot, currently sitting about a plus 150. And, you look, Damon Jackson has only lost to Movlid Kabyulayev, Ilya Taporia, and Dan Ige since 2019, all via knockout. He's a highly skilled grappler and wrestler with takedown upside in most matchups. Since returning to the UFC in 2018, Jackson secured 3 finish victories, 2 unanimous decisions, both losses coming against top 10 ranked featherweights. So really, Damon Jackson has been very good lately, and that win over Pat Sabatini as well, excellent win, but a little bit of an outlier performance for him. When you look, though, at this fight, Damon Jackson, he's 5-2 since returning to the UFC in 2020. And like I said, the only losses to Ilya Taporia and Dan Ige, top 10 guys. Then you look at Billy Q. He is favored in this fight despite coming off a brutal knockout loss. And it was horrific. That was in mid-April, guys. That was in mid-April. I went back and checked because I didn't believe it. Billy Q got absolutely flatlined by Edson Barboza via knockout in the first round, knee at 2:37 of the first round. That was on 4/15/2023. So this guy in the middle of April got brutally knocked out. And now at the middle of right at the beginning of August, he's getting right back in the octagon against a guy like Damon Jackson, who just knocked out, what's his name? Pat Sabatini in the first round. I don't know. That seems a little bit wild to me. Billy Q has also lost to Shane Burgos in a lopsided decision in 2021. Shout out to Shane Burgos, the Hurricane, New York's own. Section 9 got it done. In the battle between Section 9 and Section 6, when I was in high school, I got my ass whooped. But I'll tell you what, the battle of Section 9 and Section 6, Shane Burgos got the job done over Billy Quarantillo. I'll let you guys know that. But in any case, you look now at the fact that, Gavin Tucker, the guy that everybody's saying has no chance to win in another fight on the card, he went out there in unanimous decision, Billy Quarantillo. He got the takedowns that I talked about. He got the 100 significant strikes that I talked about off in that fight. So Billy Quarantillo is a fun guy. No doubt about that. But he is a guy that, you go back and look, common opponent, Kamwela Kirk. Jackson looked cleaner and more clinical. He got to his positions faster and he finished. Billy Q likes to be the advantage grappler in a matchup. I think it will bother him that the superior wrestler and grappler is Jackson in this fight. So for me, give me Damon Jackson. Give me the leech. I think he's going to get the job done here. I think he's a really dangerous fighter. I don't think that he's a guy who, is going to have a problem bringing a wrestling grappling pace to Billy Quarantillo. And the thing is, though, I think Billy Q round 3 props is a good way to hedge. Where was that comment? I feel like somebody left that comment here. Am I bugging? SD Crusader says, I like Jackson as well. Billy's aggressive cardio attack can work against him here after getting back in the cage so soon. I totally agree. And his propensity to take damage, I would argue. Billy Q is just willing to take on a lot of damage. Andrew says he bet Jackson by sub. Tend to agree with that, my man. Think you're on the right angle there. And I would look at the ITDs. But Jackson plus 150 on the money line. I mean, very interesting to me. That was my lean. And I said that, like I said, on Patreon earlier today. So underdog that I was taking a look at there, Damon Jackson. Next up, no bet for me, to be fair, but just letting you guys know, because I always want to be transparent on the show. That's what I'm looking at as of now. Next up, we got Jake Hadley taking on Cody Durden. This is a fascinating piece of matchmaking as well. I believe that Cody Durden has taken this one on short notice. Tagir Ulanbekov, another withdrawal from this card. Seen a lot of withdrawals from this card. Verna Jandiroba was supposed to fight Tatiana Suarez. It was Andrade who filled in on short notice. So a couple people filling in on short notice here. But in any case, Cody Durden is a guy who's been staying ready as far as I'm concerned. I've really liked what I've seen from Cody Durden in terms of the growth he's made, in terms of the improvements, in terms of the level of work ethic that has been put into win by Cody Durden at ATT. He seems like a guy who's really investing in himself, investing in his career, working really hard and improving every time out. So I can't take too much away from Cody Durden. I want to give him that big shout out. Shout out to Kai Quackenbush as well, because he's shouting me out, and I really appreciate you being here. If everybody who's watching could drop a like on this video, go a long way to support me. If you're new here, guys, make sure you get subscribed to the channel as well. Turn on the notifications if you never want to miss an episode. We're going to be doing Contender Series breakdowns. That's the new announcement as well. Want to let you guys know, me and my guy Gordo going to be going back and forth from the Plays and Fades YouTube channel, which is where he does his content. Great content, by the way, on DFS, on all sorts of great things. Make sure you support my guy at Gordo Gambles. Great guy, great human being, also very intelligent human being. So guy you want to learn from, guy you want to pick up skills and information from. In any case, I also wanted to say that we're going to be doing those Contender Series breakdowns. First one, week 1, next Monday, 11 p.m. Eastern time. And we're going to try and get those started on time for you, because it's my guy Gordo, and he's got school. He's got a bunch of other things going on. So want to make sure that those are a little bit more formal than my streams, which I'm coming back from jiu-jitsu. I'm still putting the work in on the mats today a little bit later than I expected. So came back, got the stream going. But in any case, that's enough announcements. Back to the fight. How do I feel about this one? How do I feel about Jake Hadley and Cody Durden? I'll say this. Number one, why is this guy Jake Hadley not being placed on the England cards? Why is he not being placed on some of these prominent, showcases where it seems like he would get the big crowd reactions, where he seems like he would get marketed favorably? I think the matchmakers, are not going to do this guy too many favors, because he came in and yes, he's marketable and yes, he's fun, but he also, missed weight on the Contender Series. They kind of disagreed with Dana's decision to bring him in after that weight miss. And, I think the Alan Nascimento fight kind of showed accordingly. But then they wanted to get him back on track. They give him a Carlos Candelario, a guy who was brought in my humble opinion, as enhancement talent when he fought Tatsuro Taira. When he fought Victor Altamirano on Contender Series, he lost a split decision, close fight there. Definitely proved he was, close enough to be on the level. But then he went out there, he lost to Taira. Taira, I thought, was very close to finishing that fight in the 3rd round. Hadley went out there, got the finish, cleaned him up there. And then he got the win over Malcolm Gordon. And I don't want to disrespect my guy, Malcolm Gordon. I feel like Malcolm Gordon is a guy who is not given any love or respect in the UFC. But I always talk about the fact that Malcolm Gordon has a horrendous chin. He can grapple, he can strike okay, but his chin is just no good, right? And that's something we got to talk about, is how people react to shots, how people are able to deal with that. And I think that, maybe Hadley is slightly more durable than somebody like Cody Durden, but I feel like Cody Durden can go out there and out wrestle a guy like Jake Hadley and probably not get submitted at that high a clip. I think that, shout out to our guy YBB, very, very smart individual, friend of the show, says, love him or hate him, Durden is a dog and will fight for your money. I absolutely agree with that assessment. SD Crusader says, Durden the dog loves proving haters wrong. No doubt about that either. And Jake Hadley, I do think, is going to get more wins in the UFC. He's still a young guy who's improving. He's on the come up, and he's a fun fighter. He could definitely win this fight. But at 27 years of age, I'm not sure that he's proven enough to me yet that he should be favored over a guy like Cody Durden. I don't think Cody Durden's as easy to knock out on the feet. I don't think he's as easy to submit on the ground as Candelario. And not that Candelario is easy to submit on the ground, but he was put through too many transitions. He didn't have the same physicality. I feel like Cody Durden's wrestling background will put him in a lot of dominant physical positions in this fight where he feels like he can compete. And I don't think that if you're coming out of the American Top Team room, then some guy from England is going to really scare you on the mat. And I mean, it's definitely possible that Hadley gets, the sub here, or he gets the finish. But is it something where I favor it to happen at a big clip against a guy like Durden? No, truthfully, I do not. So I think Cody Durden's going to make this a really honest fight. Let's turn to the Patreon breakdown, where I did say Cody Durden is my lean here. Open plus 150, currently at plus 145. I describe this as a fun, contentious flyweight scrap where Durden seems to be improving fight over fight as a member of the American Top Team roster. He understands his strengths are on the mat. He seems committed to keeping fights there. Durden is plus 15 takedowns and plus 1 knockdown in his last 3 UFC fights, 3-0 record, wins over Charles Johnson, Carlos Mota, and JP Buys. And that JP Buys win was a quick finish as well. Durden is showing himself rounding into form, and I don't think we can count him out. I forgive the losses to Makayev and Flick. However, I want to point out Flick definitely has, that kind of submission game that Hadley has, where you're looking for the triangle series off your back. So I do think if you're looking for how Hadley's going to win this fight, I think he would probably catch somebody like Durden in a submission. That's how I think he would win this fight. But I think it's going to be a fight where you could definitely see Cody Durden ride out top time here. Shout out to our guy Luke, sparring with reality. He says dogger pass situation. I totally agree with that take. Hadley, good submission game, but accepts bottom too much, critical. And why did Alan Nascimento win? Because he was able to get to those positions and he wasn't afraid of being submitted. He was able to work through those spots. I'm not saying that, Cody Durden is Alan Nascimento on the mat, but what I'm saying is he's got a different set of skills, American wrestling, and he's combined that with his American top team background, with his extended time on the mats. I feel like this is a guy who can avoid getting submitted over 15 minutes here as long as he plays a smart game plan out. And that's what he's been showing in his recent fights. So dogger pass situation for me. Let's see what else we've got to talk about. Guys, this is where my information is going to grind to a minimum. I can tell you, I know some stuff about Sean Woodson. Let's pull up my drive and see if I've got any notes on this guy. Off the top of my head, Sean Woodson fight tape. As a matter of fact, I do. What do we got? I've got the use of, wow. I've got 7 pages of notes on this guy, so I'm definitely going to send that over to Patreon in the very near future. Yusuf Zalal fight, Julian Erosa fight, Kyle Bochniak fight, Terrence McKinney fight. Seth, all the way back to the Seth Baszler fight. So a bunch of fights here cataloged on the Sean Woodson side. And I'll tell you guys what, I've never been super convinced on the Sean Woodson side. He's definitely got some physical intangibles, still only 31 years of age, St. Louis, Missouri, stand up. But he's got a 79-inch reach, 6'2", and he's fighting at, 145 pounds here. Yeah, I hate this weight class for him at 145. He seems way too big for me to make this weight class consistently. I do think that eventually it's going to get him knocked out in brutal fashion. If you go back and look at his resume, the Luis Aldana draw was a really scary look for him. Looked like he was getting hurt a lot in that fight. Colin Anglin, not a really notable win, to tell you the truth. Colin Anglin, I believe, went on to lose his next 2 fights, and he has not fought since. He had lost to Woodson and Melsik Bagdasaryan in a row, and then he lost on the regional scene and got knocked out in his final fight, as it would tell. Then he beat Yusuf Zalal by split decision. Yusuf Zalal, a guy who could hardly buy a win in the UFC, so he barely eked one out there. And then the Julian Erosa fight, he was submitted in the 3rd round in that fight. Cardio looked like he could be a little bit of a concern. Julian Erosa was getting hurt in that fight, and literally Woodson didn't have the cardio to press him. He was just tiring out and was able to get finished after dropping him like a minute before, if my memory serves. Let me see in my notes if that's correct. I believe that's correct. Yeah, this is my notes. It said tons of pressure from Erosa, takedown attempts to make him tired. Erosa in on the hips at 250, doubles off for the finish, uses his strength to lift and return, Darce choke, locking in, and it's over. So one of the rare Darce chokes that you'll see in MMA, right? We saw it against Chiesa, and we called that on this show. But, you're looking at here another guy who's been submitted by that Darce choke series, who could always be in danger. His opponent, I'd be lying if I said I knew much about this guy, but he's coming from Parana Valetudo. I could tell you guys that's Jessica Andrade's team. A bunch of good fighters have come from Parana Valetudo. Denise Gomes as well, Carol Hosa. A whole host of good fighters coming out of that gym. The gentleman is 1-1 in the UFC, or excuse me, in the LFA, but his loss, is to Daniel Argueta. And guys, Daniel Argueta is a UFC level fighter. And I think that I think he's a good, talented guy overall. So I don't really hold that too much against him. That was in a main event, got finished there. But Dan Argueta brings a lot of pressure. You know what? I might even have that fight catalog. Let me take a look. I have so much random stuff in here. Let's see if I've done that fight. No, I got the Tercios fight. Do I have it? Marion Santos. Let me just look up the guy's name. No, I don't have it. Okay. So I will have to go back and watch this guy. But in any case, he beat Rafael Barbosa in his last fight in the LFA. Good win there. Looking through his record, seeing if anything stands out to me. Seems like he was fighting mostly J Brones and Cans on the way up. Nothing to really hold against him either. At 7-0, he beat a 3-1 opponent. Then at 8-0, a 7-1 opponent. At 9-0, a 5-0 opponent. So he started fighting some undefeated fighters. Then a 10-0 opponent, or excuse me, a 7-3 opponent, a 7-16 opponent. So that's a little bit questionable, but got to LFA, lost that fight, gets a win. Now he's getting a short notice opportunity against a guy who I think is a little bit susceptible. So let's take a look at his social media, see if this kid's in good shape, see if he, doesn't come up. Let's see if I can find it real quick. I won't waste too much time here if I can't find it. Marian. Oh, wow. It's kind of a weird spelling. So I got to see how to pronounce that. Meiron. Meiron? Meiron Santos. I think that's it. 21.7 thousand followers. Seems like a couple days ago he's posting training footage. So he seems like a guy who's staying in shape, staying in the gym. All right. Yeah, I'm gonna give this guy a look. I'm definitely gonna do my due diligence here, but I don't have a strong opinion on the fight so far. I'm gonna have to do more due diligence, but let's just point out the fact that some intangibles here gonna be big for Sean Woodson. Gonna have a 7-inch reach advantage. Gonna have a pretty substantial height advantage as well, 5 inches. But he is going to be the older fighter here by about 8 years. So the youth goes to Mairon Santos, and you'd have to think he's probably a interesting grappling threat here coming from Brazil, and Pirani Valley Tudo, a good grappling gym overall. So some things to watch for as dynamics in that fight, but going to have to get specific with my tape study there. Next up, we've got Ode Osbourne and Asu Almbaev. And guys, this is the last fight that we will be discussing in terms of the first look this week. But if you guys have questions, things that you want to talk about, topics in MMA that you want to bring up, we could definitely talk about those as we round out the show. So you can fire those off in the chat. But for now, let's talk about this fight. And let's talk about the fact that I don't know shit about Asu Almbaev. And that's on me, guys. Almbaev. Almbaev. I'll have to work on my pronunciation. In any case, this isn't a guy that I know very well, and that's on me, right? I got to just educate myself on his fights. Seems like a really good guy to know, though, because he's been on a very long win streak, beat Zach Makovsky, who's a good fighter by split decision. So he's a guy that's definitely got UFC level wins and capabilities. You go back and look at the losses that he had, lost to Takir Ulanbekov via 3rd-round finish all the way back in 2017, but he stacked a lot of fights in the interim. So guy who seems like he is working out very hard. Also looking like he is another one of these Kazakh fighters, 13-fight win streak, 17-2 record coming off the regional scene. And what did I tell you guys about that last Kazakh guy? Yeah, I don't know too much about him, but he's a Kazakh guy, so he's probably going to win. It's super dangerous. You know, Ode Osbourne, pretty decent fighter in the UFC, but also a guy who can definitely be beat. You know, he's susceptible to losing fights. Got a split decision win over Charles Johnson. So we'll take that. But, you know, it did lose to Tyson Nam via knockout. Tyson Nam, definitely a dangerous guy, definitely could win fights by knockout, but Tyson Nam's been on a little bit of hard times, right? Went out there in his last fight, lost the split decision to Azat Maxim. And prior to that, got submitted by Bruno Silva after getting hurt badly in that fight as well. He beat Zaruk Adashev, who had a really tough go at it in the UFC, 4-3 record overall as a pro at the time they fought. And he beat CJ Vergara, but that was a very close fight, and a fight in which CJ Vergara really stormed back on him late in the fight, showed some of his cardio concerns. He has been finished twice via knockout in the first round in the UFC. He was finished via submission by Brian Kelleher. So he's just a guy that has some questionable ability to make it through the 15 minutes, but he could definitely bring some interesting skills to the table. He's a dynamic guy in his own right, does have some finish wins in the UFC, but really not against the highest level opposition. So I have to favor this UFC newcomer, Asu. Almbaev, the better wrestler. That's what the fight comes down to for me. Shout out to our guy, Sparring with Reality. He's a little bit ahead on the tape on this one. Andrew says, good cardio, wrestling, solid pressure. He's at Killcliff, homies with Shavkat. Perfect. Love to hear those things. Ode slows down big time. I totally agree. Ode has wrestling, but he also makes questionable decisions, has durability issues. I do tend to agree with that. Yeah, I'm not saying that they're terrible issues, but I do think that it's a little bit questionable because I also think it was kind of a club and sub deal from Brian Kelleher, if my memory serves. He was knee barred by Jose Luis Calvo back in the day. He's got a no contest that I can't account for. So that's a couple interesting things to note there. Now let's talk about, the odds, right? Almbaev, what is his odds right now? We'll see if it's on Tapology. So it's about minus 150 for the Kazakh fighter. So yeah, just my initial gut lean would be the Kazakh in this fight, but definitely UFC experience favors Ode. He's got a lot going for him. Fun athlete, dynamic, but I just think that his quality of wins, his quality of competition isn't that high. And, guys like this, 17-2 Kazakh fighters off the regional scene with wins over guys like Makovsky, real UFC guys. I feel like that kind of checks some boxes for me, but got to do a lot of due diligence, obviously, in the interim. Don't really know enough about him, but just giving you guys my gut level feelings at my first look here. So there you have it, guys. That's my first look at UFC Nashville in the books. The only thing that I said on Patreon earlier today was that I don't know shit about Asu Almbaev. I will study him and then get back to y'all. That's all I had on that fight for now. But the last thing that I wanted to mention on the Durden fight was I think Durden scorecards no action could be an interesting bet. I feel like if Durden doesn't get finished, he's got a pretty damn good chance to win it. He's a guy who fights for decisions. He fights to win those rounds and those moments. So a couple things that I'm looking for off the top. So I think that's a lot of what I'm looking at on these fights, guys. If you guys have differences of opinion, if you guys have favorite bets that you want to rattle off, questions, comments, concerns, I got 15 more minutes or so to rock with you guys to break down any other questions that you guys have on this card. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up best fight odds and just see if we have any props released, anything interesting to talk about from that standpoint. Doesn't seem like it. So let's pull up OddsJam instead and see if we could talk about these totals a little bit. And we'll see if anybody in the chat has things that they want to bring up as well. Fire away with whatever you guys got. But in terms of the over-unders, let's talk a little bit about those here, where we've got the over-under for the Ode fight is sitting at plus 100 comeback to the under 2.5 here, about a minus 120, minus 130 to the over 2.5 rounds. So it looks like odds makers are favoring that to go to decision. And let's see if Asu has a good record in decisions. Yes, 6-1 to decisions in his career, 3-0 to the knockout, 8-1 to the submission. So very dangerous fighter. Seems like he's capable in all positions. Matt R says Craig Jones complimented Jake Hadley's jits, and Durden is liable to get subbed. So I'm going with Hadley. Yeah, I'm not mad at that, Matt. I do think, like I said, I think Hadley's path to the win is a sub. I think the Durden scorecards no action could be interesting because I think he could out wrestle him for 15 minutes on top. But it's an interesting fight. So I definitely think Durden's going to be live as a dog, but not hanging my hat on it by any means. And I would definitely prefer the scorecards no action to the money line from a safety standpoint, from a risk management standpoint. Durden's all the way up to a plus 164, best available on DraftKings. You're looking at the best available price on Ode is at plus 165 as well. So very similar pricing for those fights. In terms of the over-unders, I'm not seeing a lot in terms of the Hadley over-unders. Doesn't seem like that's been released on the books in New York yet. But we are seeing WinBet has come to market with some totals. So WinBet is pricing the under 2.5 for Andrade and Suarez at minus 205. Think that is probably going to cash personally, because Andrade, win or lose, tends to fight under 2.5 rounds. Sometimes she wins by decision, against really durable opponents, but a lot of times she can get after it. Yeah, Andrew, that's interesting. He could crack Durden on the feet in the boxing. I don't think Durden has a perfect chin, but I do think that American style wrestling wins a lot of these fights. So it's curious, man. That's an interesting matchup. I want to do a little bit more film before I go to bat for any fighters this week. But yeah, I just think both guys are skilled, and I think Hadley's willingness to play on bottom could be something that costs him in this fight. Let's look at what they're lining the total for that fight. That would be interesting if I could find that. I'll go to fightodds.io. I'm sure Bet Online has come to market with something like that. Oh, it's on short notice. Oh, yeah, we've got it. So, yeah, they're favoring this fight to go over 2.5 rounds. They're favoring this fight to go the distance. Or no, they're favoring it not to go the distance, but they're favoring it to go over 2.5 rounds. Very interesting. Very interesting. MMA Prediction Guru says, "Do you think Tucker will be effective with his wrestling?" Man, honestly, I do. That's why I think it's such a hard fight to call. I feel like Tucker, the reason they put the fight together was to see, if Tucker is still viable as a fighter, if he could still go out there and get a win. And I think this is the kind of fight that he can get takedowns. As long as he stays safe on top, I think he could win the fight. So it's a tricky fight, though, because for me, Lopes can create damage from his back. He can create damage from the feet. So it's a fight where Tucker's going to have to be smart. He's going to have to fight, defensively sound. But in fights where he hasn't gotten hurt in the UFC, he's looked really clean and clinical oftentimes in his wins. Justin James clipped him a little bit, I think, in round 3, but in an otherwise pretty clean performance where he goes out there, gets a lot of takedowns, puts up a lot of volume. So I think that Gavin Tucker definitely could go out there and implement that takedown heavy game plan. And odds makers, I think, were expecting that. They opened him the favorite here, and it was the public that came in, flipped the line very quickly to the Lopes side and continues to push it out. So, the public could be right about it. They could be spot on, but I definitely think Gavin Tucker presents some challenges. And I think his wrestling could be successful here. What else do we got? It seems like a lot of these fights are favored to go over, favored to go the distance, guys. Seems like they're really favoring a lot of fights going over this week. Let's see the the total's hovering right around minus 165 for the Jeremiah Wells Carlston Harris fight, kind of like the under there. Barcelos and Phillips is starting to take some action to the under. I think that's probably sharp. It's that plus money as well. That's kind of interesting. Although Barcelos' win condition is probably to extend that fight to a decision. So who knows? I'm looking now at the Quarantillo Jackson fight. Under 2.5 is favored in that fight. I kind of lean towards the over, but I don't really know for sure. Leach is kind of like an underrated finisher in a lot of ways. The Leech, Damon Jackson, not the Leech, Li Jingliang. And let's see. I feel like the Jacoby fight, the under could be interesting. Yeah, you're seeing the under start to take some love in the Jacoby fight. I think that's a pretty interesting spot as well. Two guys that present challenges for each other could definitely end in a violent conclusion. Lopes versus Tucker reminds me of Filo Barres from weeks ago. I think Lopes just comes in and is more aggressive to force mistakes from Tucker. Yeah, man. And the age dynamic is there. So I could definitely see Tucker getting killed. What I mentioned right off the rip, I want to see how he comes in terms of the weight cut and everything like that, and his level of preparation. But he looks like a guy who takes his preparation extremely seriously. So, I definitely like Diego Lopes as a prospect, but it's a question of numbers as well. And I think that Lopes could afford to lose another fight here by getting taken down to his back and then changing course. Whereas Gavin Tucker, he needs to win this fight for his career. So it's a fascinating fight. Let's see. Any other things that you guys have in the chat, you could fire away and we'll go from there. Plus Lopes emo rage, says Matt R. Definitely a thing to consider. Andrew says Harris Wells fight is almost a pick 'em. Wow, action must be coming back in. That's interesting, huh? Yeah, you're seeing a lot of love come in the way of Carlston Harris. Been bet down considerably here. So you look, Jeremiah Wells open minus 210, and now it's all the way down to close to a pick 'em. So I like whenever I see lines, kind of getting close to flipping, to look towards the under. I feel like the under is very viable in fights like this. And so again, that's what I'm going to look at here personally. Hope that, whatever side you guys end up on, I hope it turns out well for you. But let's see what Joe says. Joe Maloney says Tucker, Andrade, Klein seem too wide for me, and Font too wide, but I hate that pick, to be honest. Yeah, man. I think that Tucker is probably a little too wide. I think that Andrade maybe a touch too wide, but I do think ultimately Suarez gets the job done there. I think that Klein is a live underdog, but I also think Bahamondes has a lot of natural tools, that could maybe set up that third round finish. So I think that both guys, have a compelling narrative to make there. Font, I also think, he might be slept on just a little bit here. So it's a fascinating fight card. It really is, man. Really is a fascinating fight card. Strike Count says someone must have dropped big money on Hadley. He is minus 200 on Bet Online now, nearly. Let's go take a look. So Hadley, well, he opened to minus 175, guys. He went down to minus 205. Some resistance came in. It went back to minus 180, and now it's back to minus 200. So, for me, that's not really a massive move, honestly. Yeah, he was minus 170 all week, now minus 193. You think Cody Durden will try something crazy in round one? No, I don't think so. Oh, he's double booked, says Andrew. That's funny. Almbaev has taken a lot of money. I don't trust him at minus 190. Huh. Let me take a look. Yeah, honestly, Almbaev is the one guy I really could say the least about, to tell you the truth. But there's a huge discrepancy. Bovada looks like they're hanging at minus 145. So, yeah, definitely something to take a look at there. Probably some potential ARB opportunities to the market. But, yeah, anybody at Shavkat is a buddy of mine. I used to call him Shavkat Lockmanov. You know what I'm saying? And we don't use the word lock on this show, but when Shavkat's fighting Neil Magny, it just felt like an appropriate thing to say. So, I think that Almbaev definitely is an interesting fight. He comes in with a good resume, but it's not a perfect resume. I think that was a split decision win against Makovsky. So I got to go back and watch his tape so I can give you guys a fully fledged opinion. But he seems like he checks a lot of the right boxes. And Ode Osbourne's a guy that could definitely win fights in the UFC, but he's not a world beater. He's definitely a guy who can be hurt. He's a guy who could be a decision. So I don't think he's blowing people out of the water every time. Harris was plus 225 against Shavkat. True story. I actually bet Carlston Harris against Shavkat. One of my worst bets of all time, I think. But I've learned my lesson. I've made plenty of money betting on Shavkat. But, early on, it was two prospects, both big guys, both guys going out there swinging and banging on the feet that had submission upside. And at the time, I just thought the line was a little bit wide. But, yeah, man, absolutely clownish for me. Maxime lost to me, even though the judges gave him the win versus Nam, the other Kazakhstan fighter. I feel you there, brother. But, at the end of the day, they only pay you for the ones that the judges give us. And, these prospects sometimes get the benefit of the doubt, sometimes get a little bit of that awe factor coming in. And, 39-year-olds don't always get the benefit of the doubt. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's just kind of the way it is. Matt R is asking in the chat, did you see Shavkat's sister fight yet, Liam? No, I have not. It's something that I'd be curious to see. But yeah, no, I haven't seen it yet. I kind of wait till people are ready for Contender Series, ready for the UFC, and Contender Series coming up though. So if she makes it on there, definitely going to be checking out some of her footage in the very near future. Any other questions that you guys have? We got about 3 minutes left here. Just want to say, have, over 80 pages of notes on the Patreon right now. All this stuff available multiple places. You could find all the information that you need in the description box below. If you're interested in more of my stuff, cool beans. If not, no problem. I appreciate every person that rocks with me. Every person that listens to this on audio. You can find this on podcast platforms everywhere. Liam Picks Fights presents. Pretty straightforward to find me there. If you guys want to hear Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz content on the channel this week, go ahead and drop a comment on the video stream. Let me know, because it's something where half the time if I go ahead and post something like that, people are like giving me hate. Why are you covering this kind of stuff? But my guy, Joe, is asking in the chat, Diaz or Paul. So guys, if that's something you'd be interested in, go ahead and drop that at the bottom of the video in the comment section. I would appreciate it. And let me know what you guys are interested in hearing more of. We got Contender Series on the near horizon. We got Bets and Banter later this week. Excited to get back after it, and excited to get back after it with the bets. Wasn't a great outcome for me last weekend, but it's always right back to work for me. Haven't been, on in terms of the fights that I'm picking to win. When I go to the Kevin Holland fight and I look at my analysis, it was perfect. But then I didn't end up pulling the trigger bigly on that fight. I picked some other fights to pull the trigger on. So for me, it's about zoning in where I have the best reads. Kevin Holland's a fighter I made tons of money on, and yet I didn't end up betting on his fight when my read was spot on. So I'm trying to zone in on the fighters I've had really good success betting. So let's look at our BetMMA.tips, in review, and talk about the fighters I've had really good success betting on this upcoming fight card. Number one for me by far is Jessica Andrade. I bet I did end up betting on Kevin Holland by sub, Andrew, just so you know, but not for enough money. It should have been for way more money. It wasn't on my track bets. It was just something where before the fight, it's still plus 525. And I was like, there's no way. I also identified though that it was round one sub, like either guy round one sub was plus 490. Insanity in that fight. But in any case, back to the fights that we're discussing this week. I have now completely lost my train of thought because that's the way that it goes out here. But guys, here's the most important thing. I want to say this. God bless you all. Thank you all for watching the stream. If you enjoyed it, drop a like. If you want to come back and do it all again, then make sure you get subscribed to the channel. Make sure you hit the notification if you want to start here live with us. Shout out to the sharpest chat in the game who comes in each and every week and drops a lot of sharp information. Thank you to everybody who contributed tonight, each and every time. Make sure that you continue showing love and support. Appreciate you. If you have questions, comments, concerns, you can find me everywhere on social media at LiamPicksFights, track third party at BetMMA.tips. All my information in the description box below if you forget any of that. And if you want to find more from me. So God bless. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you again very soon. Bets and Banter on Thursday. And let's crush at UFC Nashville. I wish you all best of luck on your